Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seventh episode here of the Martech Show. So great to have you here with us on, the crazy, beginning to November, at least here in the U.S. So I am super excited by the guests we have today. Jay McBain, Principal Analyst of Forrester. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Good. I've been a big fan of yours for many, many years. Super excited for the discussion we're going to have around SaaS and ecosystems and channels and all that fun stuff. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Tom, thank you so much for being the sponsor of this episode with CMO of Treasure Data.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, we have got so much to cover. Let's dive right in. I know, Jay, you put together a few slides to sort of like just help orient us. So take it away.
Yeah, I get asked by my kids and neighbors, what do you do? I'm not sure, what a channel is. I know what the Golf Channel is and the Disney Channel. Partnerships, I think, ecosystems, alliances. What is this? So the way I always start, pretty well any speech in front of an audience is 75% of the world's GDP goes indirectly. The last time you bought a car was from a dealer. The last time you bought a TV was from a retailer. The last time you bought a jar of peanut butter was from a grocer. Almost everything you spend, both personally and professionally, isn't with the manufacturer directly or the provider directly. So in that world, I focus on that middle. I focus on how things get to market in 27 different industries. I focus on how all those things work, the 100 things companies need to do to keep those dealers and agents and resellers and retailers and franchisees, educated, incented, how they do the co-marketing and co-selling with them. And there's about 100 elements that go with that. I look at the people, I look at the processes, and I look at the technology underneath that, where we're going to get today. And it's just kind of a fascinating world because it's out there, we know about it, and it's becoming more important around ecosystems. In the technology industry, what I have here is it's about 2/3 of every dollar. That's $3.5 trillion that are spent every year in technology, hardware, software, and services. And 2/3 of that, 2.2 trillion of that, goes through channels directly, but they work on about 90% of technology, even if they don't transact the actual deal. So if we kind of move on from here, one of the biggest things that's changing is the definition of what the channel is. Who are all these people in the middle? Well, you may have heard that every company in every industry is becoming a tech company. Beside that, every services company, every professional services firm in every industry is also becoming a technology services company. So what you might not know is accountants. And there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of accountants and CPA firms. 81% of them are now doing tech services. You have to go to page 4 of their website to find out that they'll still do your taxes and audit work. If you look at digital agencies, which is close to the heart of listeners here, there's 108,000 digital agencies in the US alone. These digital agencies, 78% of them now are fixated on Scott's Martech stack. These 8,000 things that they're gluing together and implementing and integrating and now securing, making compliant, doing the continuity work, doing some really interesting tech services, 78% of them. They'll also do some great creative work and other things on page 4 of their website, but they're leading with technology. Every company in every industry is adding to this technology channel. And if you look in the bottom left, ISVs, there's 175,000 SaaS companies today, up from only 10,000 10 years ago. And I made the prediction that this will be 1 million in 10 years from now. We're watching emerging tech, Internet of Things and AI and automation and blockchain and quantum computing. We're watching 800,000 companies right there that are getting funding, hiring marketing people, getting in front of customers at a level of scale that we've never seen before. So every one of your neighbors and friends and uncles and aunts and everybody is getting into this game, which is making it really interesting.
All right, but hang on here a second, because actually, I won't play the devil's advocate on this side because, I mean, I talk about 8,000 Martech companies and, I get hate mail about like, oh, that's just crazy, 8,000 Martech companies. What are you, just insane? I mean, you've got this much bigger perspective of like, let's step back and just look at software, companies or companies that I guess software has just become a part of their business model. Like, the question I always get asked is like, how is that sustainable? How does the world support 175,000, software companies, much less imagine getting to 1 million?
So I tried to answer it on one slide. I think it's next.
All right.
This is kind of a one slide answer why there's going to be 1 million SaaS companies in 10 years. You focus on a marketing, CMO, VP of marketing type of buyer. You focus on marketing tech, which, has multiple different categories on your tech stack. But if you look at the broader universe, 65% of cloud, by the way, is bought by line of business buyers today, not IT buyers. So if you look at the head of marketing or head of sales, operations, finance, HR, there are tech stacks for each of those. There's 12 of them. We're not talking tech stacks anymore by industry. There's kind of no healthcare stack. What it is there's now a stack for mid-sized clinics with 50 doctors. There's also a stack for large dentist offices. There's a stack for small hospitals. There's 12 sub-industries underneath healthcare. When you multiply that all out, there's 297 NAICS codes for sub-industries that people are building software against. So it's not a buyer, they're building against an industry, HIPAA and high-tech compliant or whatever it needs in that mid-sized clinic. So, geographic, go ahead.
Yeah, so but I'm curious, like, I mean, clearly there are some very large public cloud software companies, that would probably make the case that like, oh, well, yeah, sure, there's many, many different industries, but, the actual activities that they're doing, the actual mechanical functions of this, like, large swaths of it can just be solved by horizontal solutions, right? Like, why does the like, more vertical specialization have enough like legs to it to like stand up against, much larger horizontal players?
Yeah, so that turns out not to be true. The channel, which has always been defined, whether you're a telco channel or a tech channel, has always been defined by this last mile. You've got big companies and, in the telco world, you can bring in Verizon, you can bring in Zoom, which we're on now, you can bring in, these big horizontals, but somebody plumbs in that last mile. And guess what happens in software now? Software is eating the world, as we know. Much of that last mile is plumbed in via software, right into that mid-sized clinic. I will tell you that, Oracle or Microsoft or IBM, which I spend a lot of time at every day, are not building software for mid-sized clinics in upstate New York. There are entrepreneurs that are looking at that last mile and defining that. So the average cloud buy today, which I was mentioning, has 7 different layers to it. If somebody buys HubSpot, or if they buy Salesforce, or if they buy Marketo or Eloqua, if they buy anything, they end up buying 6 more things. We talk to 690,000 buyers every year at Forrester, and we're starting to understand what the 7-layer cake is. It's a mix of software and some hardware, like think of beacons and IoT and other stuff. And then obviously it's 64% of it is a bunch of services as well downstream. So there are geographic specific SaaS companies. If you're building to GDPR in Europe, if you're building for very specific use cases in upstate New York, there are different sectors and size and segments of customers. You've got big horizontal solutions, but does that solve for the 10 layers inside SMB or a mid-market or a Fortune 500 or government or education or health? So there are segments that are being written for software. And then there's categories. I mean, we used to live in the day, and I worked at IBM for 17 years, selling hardware, software, and services. Well, today there's 26 top line categories in technology. So if you're talking security, there's 7 layers below that, 7 major layers, and then there's 17 layers below that. So not only is there 26 layers of tech, there are 200 sub-layers that we're looking at, which are multi-billion-dollar layers. So if you multiply all that together, plus the 16 business models I just put on the Venn diagram, there's 35 million places you can write software for successfully in that plumbing in that last mile. So why is there going to be 1 million companies doing this? Because there's 35 million places they can write for. And that's why we're seeing the explosive growth. And that's why there are going to be subs of these tech stacks everywhere. that these, and marketplaces and other things. So
Yeah,
this is just a phenomenal growth opportunity.
Yeah, it's astounding. So help me understand, the perspective of, again, you have these very large horizontal, players, right? Oracle, Salesforce, Microsoft, HubSpot. The relationship then between those large, very horizontal, widely adopted companies, and then all of these other more specialists, like at one point in time, it felt like that was a very adversarial relationship, at least in the Martech space, where it's like, oh, those are point solutions, that's bad, versus, the suite, which is good. But at least in Martech, it does feel like, that narrative is, shifted to more of a, hey, actually, this doesn't have to be either or, this can be both, and it starts to get into the, platforms and ecosystems. But again, my world's kind of limited on the Martech side. Like, how's this dynamic shaping up, across the broader SaaS industry?
Yeah, so I think 2 years ago, if we had this conversation, we'd be talking about channels as a linear supply chain. Here are your VARs and resellers and managed service providers. Here's your distributors. Here's a software company. Here's how kind of the thing works. Well, today we look upwards, more celestial. All the names you just mentioned are galaxies. And Microsoft and Oracle and SAP and HubSpot and others are these big suns that have rotating stars and things around them. They're shooting comets. Like, there's all kinds of things going on, but they're overlapping. The celestial system is kind of a big Venn diagram. And so in that world, I'll use Microsoft as an example, who already has 355,000 partners, is recruiting 7,500 new partners a month.
Yeah, and I think I read something you said there
companies
too about that 7,500, which is really interesting. Is like, I think traditionally people have like sort of thought of channels like that as like, frankly, mostly sales related things. Like, oh, well, you're going to like sell our software, and so that's where the whole relationship is sort of founded on that. But did I read this correctly in what you were saying? Like, there's a huge chunk of these partners now who they don't deliver any direct revenue to Microsoft. It's all about, I guess, software and services around that, or?
Yeah, so 80% of those 7,500 new partners every single month are non-transacting partners. So this is, throws Microsoft for a loop, which does 96% of their business through the channel. So, they had a CSP program and an LSP program, and it's been well defined since the 1980s. Well, guess what? When you have these different kinds of channels, I think if you flip charts, I talk about a different view of the world now. And if you overlay the customer journey and put partners on top of that, put a partner journey on top of the customer journey, this is what Microsoft is now staring at, and everybody else. The 10,000 vendors who run channel programs that we follow, they're looking at a trifurcation of this model where up until the point of vendor selection, there is more activity than ever before. You talk a lot about the new buyer preferences. 68% of them are now on this digital only journey, avoiding salespeople like the plague, avoiding filling out web forms with correct information. They're doing everything in their power to get to vendor selection without 100 salespeople tracking them down. And the majority of cloud software buyers today are making vendor selection without ever talking to a salesperson. So here's a world where you may have lost a deal without ever knowing there was a deal. And to a company like Microsoft or a small company in their orbit, they're very concerned now about getting in early and often in front of that customer. There's an average of 5 partners that get involved in that early digital journey. Think about when you last bought a car. You're watching YouTube, you're going on social networks, you talk to your neighbor. All the moments early in that journey seem to be surrounded by people that may not include Honda, Toyota, BMW. It may include others. So those companies need to get obsessed about the 5 people that you chose to be your influencers, so that if you never use traditional sales channels, you still get influenced. So that's the influence channel. You see here a bunch of business models that used to exist in consumer, but are now becoming B2B things because of this new element where the majority of deals you may not get a crack at the way you did in the past. The next thing is this, on the other side of transaction, is the retention channel, where every company now is moving subscription and consumption based. Accenture just did a big survey where 76% of the world's CEOs think their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. And ecosystems are the number one reason why. And that's every industry. But if you go back to tech, a couple of weeks ago, IBM split its company. So I worked there with Lou Gerstner in the 90s as they created this huge service behemoth that has now been jettisoned. IBM is 100% consumption and subscription. Week before that, Michael Dell took all 7 Dell technologies, VMware, EMC, everything, to a full subscription consumption model and accelerated it because of COVID. A week before that, Chuck Robbins at Cisco. HPE has been on this journey for about a year with GreenLake, but they've now accelerated that to say that their entire business model will be subscription, 100%, by 2022. We're talking 13 months. So every company in the tech industry is moving into a model where the transaction is the first 30 days with the customer. SaaS companies get this, where it's all about retention. I got to drive adoption. I got to drive integrations that make me more sticky. And I need a channel that can do upsell, cross-sell every 30 days forever. And so that they can enrich my contract. This is all HubSpot thinks about. Yeah, you want to influence a customer, you want to get the deal, but it's all about the lifetime value of the customer and all the different KPIs and metrics. And who are those partners post-sale that can make sure a HubSpot partner or customer for life? And so in that world, it's a trifurcated model where 80% of your future partnerships are going to be non-transacting.
Fascinating. All right, so I know we've got like one of your legendary slides here that I'm going to put this on hold for a second because I want to bring Tom into this discussion, and then we'll, come back to this. But Tom, yes, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. Could you take a minute or so and just tell our audience about Treasure Data?
Sure, and it's definitely fits well with this kind of proliferation of software idea here. But Treasure Data is a top enterprise CDP provider. And we serve over 400 customers globally, including companies like AB InBev, Stanley Black & Decker, Subaru, LG, Wish, and others across a variety of industries. We were founded in 2011 and have a big data heritage. So we specialize in managing customer data at massive scale. But we also have a large library of pre-built connectors as well as templates for fast time to value. Because our customers often have data in a variety of silos, including homegrown or legacy systems, we also enjoy the challenge of helping build custom connections across the data to create that elusive 360 view of the customer. And of course, all these new technologies that we're talking about today fit into that model because there's often not pre-built connectors for all these new technologies we're talking about with Jay. So we provide maximum flexibility to our customers. Our solution is white box, so customers can get to the atomic level for their data. We're schemaless for ease of swapping in and out Martech or other technologies, which happens a lot. And we help marketers, data teams, and IT manage data in the way that's best for each of those groups, in addition to other groups like product, customer service, et cetera. So that's Treasure Data, and happy to talk more about it with anyone who's interested.
Very cool. I always love it, like when the synergy between our topic and our editorial guest and our sponsor is like perfectly matched. I think this is one of them. You want to just also briefly tell folks about the nonprofit that you supported with the sponsorship?
Sure. So I kind of crowdsourced this with the marketing team, and we got a lot of great suggestions for who we should highlight and who we should sponsor. And this is one that people kept coming back to. Second Harvest is the Bay Area one, but Feeding America is kind of the national version of it. And basically, it's supporting food banks and supporting people who have food insecurity. So during the coronavirus, obviously, there are lots of people, and they say about 50 million people may experience food insecurity this year because of the coronavirus, including about 17 million children. So we felt like this is a really important thing to support and to highlight. And hopefully people take a look at the website and consider donating or helping out.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so I want to get back to one of Jay's most famous diagrams here. Let me also take a moment here to just shout out to the audience here, our live studio audience. If you have questions for Jay and Tom, please go ahead, put them into the Q&A, on Zoom, and we will definitely have time to get to those. If you're comfortable, we'd love to promote you you to either like just share your question over audio, or if you're even feeling daring, video as well too. Just let me know in the Q&A. So Jay, tell me about
I'd actually love to go back to Tom's first slide, because I love this, because when I talk about galaxies and when I talk about things rotating and Venn diagrams and all these like big numbers that we just shared, this is it. This is the payoff slide. When I talk about adoption and integrations and stickiness and the things that really matter in a subscription lifetime value of customer model, I will tell you that the big suns inside those star systems don't provide this. They provide the foundation, and it is solutions like this that pave that last mile and actually end up delivering the business outcome and the business value to the customer. You can't build a house without a foundation, but the amount of alliances, the amount of data connectors, the amount of data that's being managed here across all of these brands, which we all recognize across the bottom. We probably recognize the other 380 of them as well. And the fact of the matter is, this is their outcome. It's not just going onto a big marketplace and signing up for a piece of major marketing software. They need that last mile to be paved for them, and this is it.
Well said.
Thank you, Jay. We like to think that having something like a CDP makes the rest of the stack much more valuable. So we love all the other tools that they use, and just the ability to have access to the same version of the truth on the customer data or other data, inventory data, other things they want to put in there is so powerful. So thank you.
And congratulations on your ranking on the Forrester Wave.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, too. We just got customer analytics as well as real-time interaction management. So we're in the last couple of months, so we're super jazzed about that.
That's great. That's fantastic. So this is so when I talked about the this chart here, and this was inspired, by the way, by one Scott Brinker.
I'm sorry about that.
I built I ran a startup and a SaaS company myself for 7 years before joining Forrester, and raising money and doing all the things I did. One of the key parts of my investor deck was building my own stack, which was building the technology that we were taking to market. It happened to be channel software, but it was a key part of allowing people in the room that really didn't understand channels to understand in a tech stack format how it connected all these stars and moons together. And that got me off, you only get 10 or 20 minutes to pitch your company. And instead of spending 10 minutes explaining why we're different than the Golf Channel and Disney Channel, I could get off of that in about 30 seconds, because they recognize how a tech stack works, and then they understand how it all comes together and what the valuation might be. So when I got out of that startup and work with Forrester, one of the ways I do my job better, understanding all these channels and partnerships and the 75% of world that goes indirectly, I went to the technology and said, what do these tens of thousands of companies that run these 75% or $65 trillion of world trade through channels, how do they do that? How do they manage all these partners and ecosystems? How do they market to, through, and with them? How do they onboard them and at least get them to the point of being dangerous? Education, training, certification. How do they incent and motivate and drive loyalty? In many cases, if it's not a car dealership, the dealer is actually selling everybody. So they're out there, they could sell you HubSpot, they could sell you Marketo, they could sell you Eloqua. I mean, they have a choice, and who they lead with and who they endorse is really, really important. And then you get into the data. Think of the mountains of data you have as a marketing leader, and think of most of that's internal, data. Well, in an external world, you have to go pick it up from distributors and wholesalers and every country of the world. And the challenge is obviously that you don't own the data. So you got to go get it. You got to clean it, because every single one of those things spells the same customer name wrong and puts a comma where they shouldn't. You need to then build this huge, massive data lake that makes the rest of this stuff work. There's all kinds of finance and CPQ and inventory stuff that comes with channels. And then the new one in the bottom right is this whole idea that I'm talking about, this trifurcated channel where 80% of your partners are not transacting. You got to start rethinking how your current channel is going to grow by 10x in the next 5 years. And there's a lot of moving parts. And now that I can't trace it back to an actual transaction, and I can't pay them incentives on a transaction. I can't pay them market development funds on a transaction. I still need to do all that stuff, but I got to completely rethink how to run an ecosystem, which is different than a linear supply chain. So this helps the market, the 159 companies, helps the market imagine the layers that you need. When I mentioned 7 layers, it wasn't by accident. There's also 7 layers of the tech stack. That if you want to do all these things effectively, you're probably building your own internal stack to do it, because no one of these companies does everything. And when I look at the 18-month roadmap, future roadmap of every one of these companies, that tells me, and I get to look at them every quarter, that tells me the future of channels. What tens of thousands of companies are asking these companies to build for them in the next 18 months tells me how this is going to be implemented in the next 18 months at scale. So, I could guess about the future, or I could actually go and, see real life how it's shaping up.
So like for these 159 companies, so you've got that, bird's eye, bird's eye, all right, high level view of, their roadmaps and where they're headed. How much of that is saying, okay, yeah, we just need to go deeper, on what our specialization is, that there's, so much, road still to be covered there, versus how much of it is like looking around and saying, well, these other things that are adjacent to us, we could kind of just like absorb that capability into our, product as well.
Yeah, there's a number of things. Like about 1/4 of my calls comes from Wall Street. So if you want an interesting story, go back 20 years. To when CRM started. There was 300 CRM companies. Back in 1999, when Salesforce came around. We know who the handful of winners are in CRM. And that decade, that first decade, 99 through 09, was really the decade that brought sales from an art to a science. You aren't born a salesperson. You don't manage a territory with your gut. CRM changed that. And the sales stack above that changed it forever. The next decade was the decade of marketing automation. So what sales did now became marketing. You used to go to a cocktail party and, say 50% of my marketing dollars are wasted. I just don't know which 50%. It's really funny. Everybody would laugh and, you'd carry on. Well, in the last decade, that doesn't happen anymore. You couldn't get a job in marketing without being a certified ninja in HubSpot. Or, there was 150 marketing automation companies back then in 09. Well, we know the 5 winners that emerged, and 3 of those big ones were, acquired by big companies like Oracle and Adobe and Salesforce. It became its own industry. It has its own 8,000 logo tech stack of orbiting stars and moons and things like that. So the next decade, you can't go around to these cocktail parties. Well, because of COVID, nobody's going to any parties. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't exist anymore. Marketing is a science. Well, the third phase here, this next decade, started about a year ago, is the decade of the channel. Most casual observers, other than Salesforce and Oracle, would not recognize one logo on this chart. And we're at the early stages. This is 09 for marketing or 99 for sales. And Wall Street is really interested in the 5 winners. Which of these 5 companies will be acquired by an Oracle, an Adobe, Salesforce? Which of them, like HubSpot, are going to just become huge companies on their own without being, acquired by a big company? So they're really focused on the economic impact here of which of these logos are going to win. I get it that there's 159. I get it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Where are the winners?
Yeah, so that's interesting because you got this like tension in this narrative of, I think this idea of saying, okay, yeah, markets start out, there's a tremendous amount of competition, but eventually, yeah, there are like 5 primary winners. It does feel like that's one narrative that's counter to, hey, there's all these tremendous opportunities and you're going to see more and more specialization. How do you rationalize those 2 competing narratives?
It's a realignment, actually. So, if Salesforce, for example, was one of those 300 companies, they became the center star. The other, by the way, 295 companies that weren't the winners didn't go away. They didn't go bankrupt, but they're on the App Exchange today, which is the layer higher than Salesforce, doing something more specific for a certain set of customers. So if you look at all those companies from back in the day, there were actually no losers. There were no bankruptcies. They just had to refine what they did. So in the infrastructure space, when Azure, AWS, and Google were declared winners, everyone else had to decide, where they go. When IBM and other players understood that they weren't going to be one of the 80% share winners, you have to understand in that 7-layer stack, where you're going to go add value. AI, security, data, CDP, all the different layers on top of that. So in this market, it hasn't been declared yet who the 5 winners are. There's a ton of activity going on from private equity, and many of these companies have made 5 or 6 acquisitions in the last 18 months. Every year, 15 of these logos go away. I've done this for 4 years in a row now, and there's another 15 changes that are coming next month when I do 2021s. So it's a rapidly evolving market, but I could probably predict, and I won't say today, but I could probably predict 3 of those 5 winners already at the end of this decade.
So Tom, how does this look from your perspective? Because I mean, your customers are like leveraging treasure data, to be able to manage, these increasingly diverse Martech stacks. I hear competing narratives there too. Like I hear this narrative of people wanting to rationalize, which is code for, hey, let's jettison anything that we don't need anymore.
Right.
But yeah, at the same time, I mean, the net number of tools that, at least from where I sit, seem to keep being adopted, still grows. What do you see there? Like, is this reaching a level set point, or is it shrinking, growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general it's growing. I think there's times where companies kind of go, wow, we're out of control. Let's do a bottoms up, like individual analysis of every single tool we have and decide what we need to jettison. But oftentimes they find, yeah, this one adds value here. This one adds value because of this. This does this differently than they can, so it's in a lot of times they actually need most of those tools if they want to achieve the goals that they're doing. So yeah, we see a lot of everyone that we work with has multiple tools and they serve very specific functions. And they're often, they will sometimes swap in and out. Sometimes they will cut one out and then, use the, maybe cloud has added some capability that they'll use instead. But they use multiple tools and they coexist, and they need something that's like a Switzerland that can handle the data that comes from all these different tools, and then it can normalize it so that they can use it back in those tools with the intelligence that they get from the other part of the stack.
Cool. I've got so many questions I'm dying to ask both of you, but I want to respect some of the great folks in the audience here who are sending in questions. So Steve, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to chatting. Up to you if you want to turn on your video or not, but do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. I appreciate that. And video, I think I'll just ask the question I have. But if you take a look at what we just heard, we have 7 layers, Scott, to your stack, Jay within that, 7 layers to your channel software stack, and we see 297 sub-industries there are people selling software against. And just wondering, how do we make sense of this? How do we effectively navigate all of these different vendors when looking at our own stack and how we want to keep upgrading that? Is there any sort of science to it rather than doing a bidders conference or spending the next 365 days evaluating different vendors?
So I'll take and Steve, great to hear from you, and a very close friend of mine from back in the days of Raleigh, and helped Lenovo hit a home run with me back about a decade ago. So my answer to that is my original opening to this event, which was the channel. So the average buyer who is going against these hundreds of thousands of things and millions of things, and when you multiply it all together, it's just chaos. The answer is the average buyer will wrap themselves around 5 people or companies that they're trusted, that are talking their language, will help guide them through that journey and narrow pretty quickly the stack for them. And it says, who has the resume across those vectors that I talked about? Who has the resume serving a buyer in your role, in your sub-industry, in your geography, in your product area you're looking at, and in your sector and segment? So for mid-sized clinics in upstate New York with 50 doctors and a marketing buyer, there's only a handful of people on the planet that have that resume. And there are people that help you get there through their ebooks and their white papers and their podcasts and hundreds of different ways on their social networks, on their LinkedIn groups. The fact of the matter is that is discoverable today. You can find that on the front page of Google, who's speaking your language, on the front page of a marketplace, who's speaking your language, and starting to understand who the super connectors and influencers are around you, who speaks at the events you go to, who runs the podcast you listen to, who sits on the board of the association you're in, who's on the front cover of the magazine that you actually open. These are all the things of the people that will help you narrow this chaos into a pretty good set of companies that you should be considering.
Yeah, that's awesome, Jay. Thank you very much for that. That makes so much sense. Also, if there's in large enterprise companies, they may be an SAP house, so they're going to want to pivot off of that. That makes a lot of sense. Shared knowledge, and then you have your trusted advisors who also trust each other. Thank you.
Right. There's also the system integrators or the Forresters of the world who will advise companies on who to talk to, et cetera.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Steve. Bob, if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Scott, thanks very much. Jay, great insights. So I understand what you mean by, first the decade of sales and the decade of marketing. Totally agree with that. When you look out to the next decade, how do you see B2B marketplaces evolve over the decade? Do you see them as an extension of the channel or a replacement of part of the channel?
Well, it's a great question. And I probably get asked this 5 times a day. So I've rehearsed my answer a little bit, but here's the first deal. Marketplaces have grown because of COVID more in the last 3 months than the last 10 years combined. We know this on the consumer side by the amount of Amazon boxes I have outside my door probably right now. But the fact of the matter is there's a close correlation to a future B2B buyer than a B2C consumer in terms of how they go through their journey. And so the hockey stick that we're on, and by the way, that number is a McKinsey number using Forrester data. This hockey stick that we're on has a monumental and material effect to the channel. So when I said that the transaction is lessening in terms of importance, this is actually driving, because of COVID, a stake in that a bit further, in that it makes better sense for a customer if they're going to buy a 7-layer cloud stack to do that on a marketplace where they can procure and provision and do all the things they need in one place. It might be a partner doing that on their behalf, but the fact of the matter is you get better trust out of your CFO that you're not just a wild rogue or shadow IT department, that it seems to be managed. You get a bunch of other advantages. So there's no reason in the future that Larry in the white van should be going to meet all 7 of these companies, becoming a partner of them, doing all the special bid pricing, and in 2 months coming back to try to give you a single bill. There's no point and there's no value in the middle of the channel anymore in a cloud SaaS world to play that role. It just doesn't make sense. And Larry doesn't do it well, and Larry doesn't want to do it because Larry makes 10 to 20% margin doing that, where the downstream in the cloud is about a 5-time multiplier. So for every $1 you spend on HubSpot, there's about a $5 opportunity for Larry to go install, implement, integrate, secure, comply, all the things I mentioned in that environment at 75% margin. So I'd rather bill, 4 or 5 times my resale margin and spend the time where I can add the most value to the customer. So it's definitely accelerating this trend. I've predicted 20 winners over the life of the marketplaces. And I wrote a blog a couple of weeks ago. I think we can share it after in terms of who I think the 20 winners are. It's the way you look at it, it's actually pretty easy to kind of figure out where that's going.
I read that blog. It's really quite good. Thank you both.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. All right, so I have a question for you. Most of what we've been talking about here is commercially packaged software, whatever scale it is. But when we look at things like Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud and Azure and all this, right? A million SaaS products by 2027 sounds astounding. But I've seen estimates here that in that same time frame, the number of actual custom apps that get created is orders of magnitude more than that, 500 million or so. How does that relate to this? Like, are these things, are we seeing a shift between like what people would buy a packaged solution for versus what they would like build themselves? I have this for both of you because I'm sure, Tom, like you've got people interfacing to treasure data, that it isn't just about, the off-the-shelf connectors to, existing apps. It's their own technologies that they're building as well too. What's your perspective on this?
So yeah, I agree with you, and not to mention the legacy tools that they have that they're stuck with for a while. So yeah, we connect with legacy, the off-the-shelf software, as well as their new apps. I think companies always feel like they're unique and their challenges are unique. So there's always this tension of, we can find something off the shelf that works good enough, or no, we should build a custom app. So there are often custom apps that they have and we have to integrate with because of that tension, and people think they can do it better than what's out there and that it fits exactly their use case. So yeah, I think it's going to continue, and that was a point I was thinking about earlier, is to your citizen developers and your low code tools make that more prone that people are going to go try things like that.
Yeah, I would completely agree, and I'll just take it a step further and talk about the barrier to entry. The reason I'm using 1 million as a prediction is because of an extremely low barrier to entry. So use an example, that mid-sized clinic in upstate New York, I go and solve the problem with HubSpot. I use the no code, low code tools within HubSpot and pave some of that last mile. But whoever I am, I'm a system integrator, I'm an MSP, I'm a digital agency, it doesn't matter who I am. Once I've done that, I take a look around and say, the work I just did on HubSpot could be used in every mid-sized clinic on the planet. So I go to GoDaddy and get a $5 URL. I go to Fiverr and get a $5 logo. I get my kids to hook me up on LinkedIn over the weekend. By Monday, I'm an ISV. So that's this citizen developer. And the idea that when I become a product, when I become a company, that allows me to show up better on a Google search. It also allows me to show up better on a marketplace search. In a world of millions and millions of custom companies and service companies, I would rather show up as a product in that 7-layer cake than I would somebody who does all things to all people all the time and compete on generic marketing language. Everyone's going to be looking at productizing or codifying their IP. That's the big move here. And the low barrier to entry is what creates this million tech stack.
So when companies are productizing this, it does feel like, though, this is a very different kind of product than like, if we go back and say like, traditional SaaS, raising a whole bunch of money from VC, the goal was like, oh, well, clearly we're going to have this, product that's going to be sold to, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And so there was a certain economics of like, how you will become a big public company someday. Clearly, once you start getting down into these things, well, I'm focused on building the software, for these, mid-sized clinics, in upstate New York. No VC is going to fund that, right? I mean, is this like some sort of sea change in just the economics of SaaS? Is it all just funded by customers?
I don't think so. So if you fixate on that 7-layer cake, the 1 or 2 layers on the bottom of that are $1 trillion valued, suns in the star system. Mm-hmm. The next 2 or 3 layers, like the big security company, the big AI tools you use, the big layers next are your traditional VC-backed, PE-backed companies that are looking to get acquired or looking to go public. But I'm talking about the 6th or 7th layer. When you're trying to sell that plastic wrapped beacon in that mid-sized clinic that's HIPAA compliant, you're never going to be VC-backed. When I'm selling that last mile piece of software that I got a $5 URL for, I'm not looking for VC backing because I'm profitable out of the gate. I write it once, the customer paid me to write it, and now I'm going to sell it at an 80 to 90% margin to every other mid-sized clinic on the planet. All I have to do is I have to win on the 20 marketplaces, get on front page. I have to win on Google SEO. I have to do some good marketing, hopefully with that HubSpot that I ended up implementing. But if I do that, I'm going to have a really nice business that may get acquired, who knows, by Accenture, who wants mid-sized clinic software, but maybe not. The fact of the matter, it's going to be profitable out of the gate. I don't have to run at a loss. It's going to be a really nice cushion to the services business that I already run.
Fascinating. Wow. Okay. I could easily ask both of you like a ton more questions, but we have come up to the end of our time, unfortunately. Jay, thank you so much. Yeah, for sharing just all your insight on this. Tom, thank you for joining the conversation, sponsoring the event. This episode. Steve, Bob, thanks for your questions, and everyone who tuned in. Thank you very much. We will see you on the next episode. Have a great day.